as we mentioned in our introduction, the case that we are discussing is the rotzeach bishgaga, a person who kills accidentally. And what our Mishnah is trying to do is determine what qualifies as accidental, what are we calling bishgaga, and the way that the Mishnah determines it is through being deliberately narrow. There are all kinds of scenarios that I might refer to as accidental, and what the Mishnah and the Gemara are trying to do is to narrow that scope and to determine what exactly is the halachic category of killing accidentally. On the one side, there is the person who is called anus, the person who is forced or close to being forced, a person who had no control. In that scenario, though it is unfortunate, you can't actually attribute the death to this person's negligence. So theoretically, anything that is not deliberate could be termed accidental, but because the rabbis see going to the Ir Miklat as a punishment, right, the punishment called galut, and as something that grants kapara, right, something that grants atonement, there needs to be some sort of guilt associated with the death in order for galut as a punishment to make sense. And it seems fairly clear that if a person is not guilty enough to be sentenced to the Ir Miklat, they are essentially acquitted. But on the other side is someone who we'll call karov lemezid. They aren't actually acting intentionally, premeditated murder, but dangerously close. And this person is too liable to get forgiveness by going into the Ir Miklat. The Gemara, however, never tells us what does happen to this person. They could end up being vulnerable to an attack by the Goel Hadam, but the Goel Hadam doesn't have the right to kill him. Or it could merely be that we don't create a framework for them to gain forgiveness. They are safe from the Goel Hadam, but we do not create a way for them to be guaranteed atonement. It doesn't seem that they're liable enough to be put to death. The question is very clearly defined in our Mishnah as who is getting galut, who qualifies for galut, as opposed to answering the broader and maybe more satisfying question of what happens to anyone who kills in every possible permutation. We're going to begin with the first Mishnah of our parak on page Zayin Amud Aleph, 7a in the Gemara. The Mishnah begins with the word elu, these. But in fact, there is only one person who fits into this category. Elu hein hagolin, these are the ones who get exile, but there's only one person, the manslaughterer. And the reason why our Mishnah starts with Elu hein hagolin, these are the ones who are receiving exile, is that it's following in the pattern of the previous chapters of the Gemara and Sanhedrin, which talk about various different penalties. Elu hein hanechnakin, these are the ones that are liable for strangulation. Elu hein hanisrafin, these are the ones who are liable for death by fire. And following in that pattern is Elu hein hagolin, these are the ones who are going into exile, but there is no Elu, right? There aren't more than one person who fit into the category of going into exile. There happens to only be one. However, this isn't just stylistic. It indicates to us that going to the Ir Miklat is a punishment by making our Mishnah follow the paradigm of these get that punishment, these get that punishment, these get that punishment, even if I don't know anything about galut, what it is, who goes there, I know that galut is a punishment because I have the language of Elu hein, these are they who receive this punishment. It also is fun to know that there was a time that Sanhedrin and Makot were considered to be one tractate. They were later separated into two, and this is a nice continuity of language between Tractate Sanhedrin, what we now call Tractate Sanhedrin, and Tractate Makot. As we said before, it is not clear from the Torah that this is a punishment. But by the time we get to the rabbis, it is designated as a punishment, and it also moves from the wild west of the Goel Hadam chasing after the Rotzeach into the realm of the courts, into the realm of Beit Din's administration. This is now a punishment administered by Beit Din after a trial, as opposed to a system set up to protect manslaughterers from the crazed retribution of the victim's family. On a philosophical level, it also allows you to appreciate that even something that is for the good of the killer also has a lot of components that are to his detriment. Even though, yes, going to the Ir Miklat is a refuge, this is going to save this person's life, nevertheless, it's also a punishment. He's also now stuck in a prison. And anyone who has been through a difficult medical treatment knows, right, that it can also be punishing to the psyche and punishing to the body even as it heals the body. So even though it grants atonement and it's something that is good for the accidental killer, the Rotzeach Bishgaga, as it is saving him, it is also punishing him. Now that we know that it's a punishment, we see that the rabbis need him to shoulder some blame if he is going to be cut off from his former life as a consequence of this accident. Unless the killer is somewhat guilty, we don't have the right to imprison them. We cannot cut them off from their life. They, that is the rabbis, recognize that galut is galut. It is painful and it is isolating, and therefore, in order to send someone away, we need to have a definition of the killing that includes some level of culpability. As we go through the Mishnah, you'll see there are 3 cases where the determining factor of guilt is derech yeridato, in the direction of going down. We will read through this Mishnah and then discuss why this is the Mishnah's framing. Elu hein hagolin. These are the ones who go into galut. And again, grammatically, you expect there to be more than one person in this category, but it ends up being just one, hahoreg nefesh bishgaga, someone who kills someone accidentally. And what does this look like? Haya me'agel b'ma'agela. He's pushing this very heavy roller, right, to smooth out the top of a roof. V'nafla alav v'haragato. And this roller rolls down, falls on the victim, and kills him. Or, haya mishalshel bechavit. Or, the killer is letting down a bucket. V'nafla alav v'haragato. And the bucket falls down, and it kills the victim. Haya yored basulam. Or, the killer is going down on a ladder. Nofel alav. He actually falls physically on the victim, v'haragato, and he kills him. Hare ze gola. In all 3 of these examples, where I'm doing something in a downward motion, if that results in somebody getting killed, the consequence for that is galut. Aval, im haya mosheich b'magela. If the direction that I was pulling the roller was towards me, not down, but up, haya dole bechavit. I'm pulling the bucket up. V'nifsak hachavel, and the rope snaps. And then v'nafla alav v'haragato, and then the bucket falls onto the victim and kills him. Or if I'm going up the ladder, and even though I'm going up, I end up falling on the victim and killing him. Hare ze eino gola. This is a scenario where I'm not quite culpable enough to be sent into galut. Zeh haklal. And now the Mishnah provides us with a rule of thumb. Klal is a principle, a general principle. Kol she b'derech yeridato gola. Anything that happens when it's in the way of going down, okay, then you will go into galut. But shelo b'derech yeridato, if it's not through going down, eino gola, this person does not go into galut. Why? Why does it matter whether the object is going up or going down? Why does it matter whether the person is going up the ladder or going down the ladder? If it is b'derech yeridato, if I'm pushing, I'm dropping, I'm going down, even if I didn't intend for my action to kill, the killing was a consequence of what I was doing, of what I wanted to do. I am pushing something heavy down, and then it rolls further than I intended. But that is still a clear extension of my will. I was pushing, even if the result wasn't exactly my will. However, if I am trying to go up, and what happens is in the opposite direction, what happens is going down, then the will that I have demonstrated is the opposite of the result. So I am not culpable enough to go into galut. To take this out of the literalness of going down, right? Not thinking only about the vector of whether I'm headed down or heading up, and to translate it, if I meant for this action to happen, but I didn't mean for it to have this consequence, that is the accidental that we are talking about in the Mishnah. I did mean to push a heavy stone. I did mean to drop a bucket. I did mean to go down on a ladder. I didn't realize that if I kept on going in this direction, it would end up taking a life. But what I ended up doing was a continuation of what I had already started to do. Now, the Gemara is going to unpack this same idea in its own way. The Gemara's discussion begins by supporting the standard of derech yeridato. And the Gemara asks, Minna hani mile, from where are these words? Minna hani mile is not a challenge question. It's the Gemara's way of asking, how can I support this with a verse? Amar Shmuel, Shmuel comes and supplies this verse, de Amar Kira, as the pasuk says, vayapel alav vayamot. Okay? He caused something to fall upon him, and he, that is the victim, dies. And then Shmuel explains, al sheyepol derech nefila. The only scenario where the killer is liable is where the action happened through vayapel, through derech nefila, by way of falling. The full context of the pasuk, o bechol even asher yamut ba, or with any rock that is theoretically deadly, right, is lethal, below ra'ot, without seeing or without awareness, vayapel alav vayamot, he caused it to fall upon him and he died. You could see, right, that there's a connection here between the object that might be causing the death, a rock, okay, and that it is ending up falling on the person and they die. The Gemara continues with a braita. A braita is a Tanaitic text, meaning one that is contemporaneous with the Mishnah, but is not included in the Mishnah. Some of these braitot are going to be midrashei halacha, commentaries directly on the Torah, and some of them are going to be a tosefta, a work that is very much like the Mishnah by topical order, or something that we call a Bavli braita, which is a Tanaitic text that is identified by the Talmud Bavli, incorporated into the Talmud Bavli, and seen nowhere else but the Talmud Bavli. Okay. In this section of the Gemara, we see two rabbinic moves at work. First, the rabbi's assumption that there can never be unnecessary or redundant terms in any pasuk in the Torah. So each time this case is described in the Torah, it needs to be teaching us something new. The second assumption is, of course, that Shemot, Devarim, and Bamidbar all view the case in exactly the same way. So therefore, even if one verse is in Bamidbar and another is in Devarim, they still need to be complementarily describing the exact same thing. It can't simply be that there are two versions, and this is the way Shemot talks, and this is the way Bamidbar talks. There need to be two versions that are both not identical, because they each need to be teaching me something new, right? They cannot simply be redundant, but they also cannot be in conflict. They also need to work well together. Tanu Rabbanan, our rabbis taught. Bishgaga, right? This is the Rotzeach Bishgaga, they kill by accident. The language of Bishgaga excludes Parat Lemezid, someone who does something intentionally. And Bivli Dat, without awareness, which between you and me sounds a lot like Bishgaga, okay? This Baraita says that is coming to exclude Mitkavein, someone who does so with intent. Okay? So Bishgaga excludes someone who is being deliberate, and Bivli Da'at excludes someone who is acting with intent. We'll discuss the difference between these two definitions when we get to the end of the passage. And now the Gemara is going to jump in and say, wait a minute. Mezid, you are telling me that the language of Rotzeach Bishgaga is coming to exclude someone who acts deliberately? Pshita, that is obvious. Bar katalahu, that person is subject to death. Bar literally means son. Katala means killing. Okay, so the Gemara says, wait a minute. It doesn't make any sense for the word bishgaga to be telling me that a person who kills deliberately doesn't go into galut. I already know that because I know what the punishment is for someone who is a cold-blooded murderer. That person receives the death penalty. That person is a bar katala. And here is another specifically Talmud Bavli assumption, that the Torah can't be teaching us something that is obvious. This, however, is not an assumption that the Tanaitic literature has. The plain understanding of this Breita is that this is exactly what the Pasuk is teaching us. Someone who kills intentionally does not go to the Ir Miklat and is not subject to the laws of Galut. But now the Gemara has to explain on its own terms why the Breita needs to tell me this if it seems obvious. Ella Amar Rava, so rather Rava comes and says, Ema, I will say, Prat le'omer mutar. This is coming to exclude someone who says that it is permitted. Okay, not mezid in the classical sense, because I know that mezid in the classical sense gets killed. Why do I need to be told that the mezid is not going to galut? It's talking about a different kind of mezid. Okay, someone who says that it's permitted. V'amar le Abaye, and then Abaye says back to Rava, I omer mutar, wait a minute. If this is a person who says that it's permitted, they think that what they're doing is fine, anusu, that person is considered to be not under their own control. That person is considered to be forced. Amar le, Rava says back to him, Sha'ani omer, but that's not my perspective. I say, ha'omer mutar, karov lemezidhu. The person who says that what they're doing is correct, what they're doing is permitted, even though objectively it's wrong, they have the information, the misinformation that tells them that it's correct. That person is karov lemezid. That person is close to being a mezid. So Rava says, listen, according to the way that I conceptually understand an omer mutar, someone who says that it's permitted, who thinks they're doing the right thing, I think that person is closest to being a mezid, closest to doing something deliberately, and that's why I need the word bishgaga to tell me that that person doesn't actually go into galut. Abaye and Rava have a core conceptual disagreement around someone who is objectively wrong, but they are convinced that they are right. Are they the greatest victim? They are completely misinformed, and according to what they think, they are doing the right thing and therefore cannot be held accountable. They are, in Abaye's words, anus. Or is this person karov lemezid? They are clearly acting deliberately. And the fact that they are misinformed doesn't help them. It might even make it worse. Perhaps this is also a machloket about the purpose and the nature of punishment. if the point of a punishment is to reform a person's character, then it actually doesn't make sense to require a punishment in the case of where a person is doing what they think is right. Because structurally, they have done the right thing. A person should behave in accordance with their own convictions. A person should act according to what they are told. This person happened to have the wrong information, but they had the right mindset and therefore shouldn't be punished. This person is anus, according to Abaye. The element here that was problematic was the information, and that was an element that the person was not in control of. On the other hand, perhaps what we are punishing is the act itself. If the act is harmful or problematic, the fact that this person did it with full awareness of what they were doing makes the action stronger, makes it more deliberate, and from the perspective of the act, much more problematic. And this is the viewpoint of Rava. What is important to note is that Rava and Abaye are having a conceptual disagreement. Neither of them thinks that this person should go into galut. The question is only, should this person be called mezid by the Breita? According to Rava, they are a type of mezid, and therefore can reasonably be the person who the Breita excludes when it says that a mezid is excluded. And according to Abaye, this exemption just wouldn't fit with the language of the Breita. You wouldn't say with the exception of a mezid and actually be referring to a person who is basically an anus, basically someone who has no control. However, both of them would agree on the bottom line. This person does not go into galut. The question is only, is it because they are too culpable or not culpable enough? The Gemara then goes back to the next inference of the Breita. Mitkavein, pshita, bar katalahu, right? The same exact question. You are telling me that the phrase bivli da'at comes to tell me that someone who acts with intention doesn't go into galut? To quote the 90s, duh, right? Pshita, that's obvious. That person is sentenced to death. They are a bar katala. So then Rabba comes in and he says, actually, prat lemit kavein laharog et ha-behema veharag et ha-adam. It actually is coming to exclude someone who does have intent to kill, but they intended to kill an animal. They didn't intend to kill a human. Okay, so they had lethal intent, and you might have thought that this person was included as someone who would go into galut, but since they actually had murderous intent, even though they didn't hit the right target, right? They were intending to kill something that was permitted, but they ended up killing something that was forbidden. That person is too liable to go into galut, even though I would not say that that person is a bar katala, right? That person would necessarily clearly receive the death penalty because they didn't both intend to kill a person and kill a person. They intended to kill an animal and then they killed an animal. This person is someone who did in fact intend and is someone who intended to kill, but they didn't hit their target. The question remains open about what to do with such a person and even how to think about them. It is permitted to kill an animal, of course, but if one is using lethal force, don't they have an added responsibility to look out and make sure that they have the right target? It is not clear at all that this person would be excluded from the Ir Miklat. In some ways, they are a classic example of shogeg, of doing something by accident. It seems most likely to conclude that they are considered to be too implicated to get expiation through the Ir Miklat, and therefore they can't go there. When I am rolling on my roof, what I am doing is dangerous, but it's not inherently lethal. When I am aiming to kill, I can't just claim it was an accident. For the next session, we're actually going to be skipping the coming Mishnah on the bottom of 7b and going to the first Mishnah on 8a, Hazorek Even. This is going to continue the theme of dangerous behavior and how to think about whether to classify that behavior as accidental or perhaps more.